turn our attention towards something else you're going to want to grab, you're going to want to read, you're going to want to learn from. America in Retreat, the New Isolationism, and the Coming Global Disorder. Bret Stephens is the author, foreign affairs columnist, deputy editorial page editor with the Wall Street Journal, and winner of the Pulitzer Prize in 2013 for commentary. We're honored to have him on the show. Bret, good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
What an outstanding piece of work this is, because boy, everything that a lot of people that I discuss these things with are talking about, you hit in this book. Basically, what are we doing, pulling our horns in and pulling the blinds and trying to ignore what's going on out there?
When I started writing this book just before the 2012 election, a lot of people told me my thesis was crazy, that the tide of war was receding. You heard that line. Al-Qaeda was on a path to defeat. You probably heard that one too. Yeah. The world was a pretty benign place, or so people thought. And I had a different view. I had a different feeling. So I started writing the book with the view that we were entering a period of some really sharp international shocks, that we were going to be awakened once again to the reality that the world is a dangerous place, and a dangerous place especially if you are the superpower and the principal target for every terrorist, the principal competitor for every rogue regime. And so that's what got me to write this book. And it's written really with the hopes that the next crop of presidential candidates read it and understand what a serious foreign policy for a great power like the United States is going to look like, because no great power can treat foreign policy as a spectator sport, at least if we intend to remain a great power. So that's what the book is for.
We see how quickly the conventional wisdom has changed, Bret. You mentioned just 2 years ago, everything's receding. We don't need to use our strength to flex our muscle. And we see it changing, I think, just in, Rand Paul is basically going to run, it appears, in the 2016 primary, almost a continuation of the president's foreign policy. And I don't see how that's a winner anymore among conservatives, among many Republicans. That's a tough sell, considering what we've seen over the past 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, I think that Rand Paul's moment, in terms of at least what he's prescribing when it comes to foreign policy, has passed. I mean, maybe he's going to start changing his tune. Politicians are allowed to evolve, and he's free to evolve away. But clearly Americans understand that this is not a benign international moment. When we have Americans just recently, in the last few days, continued to be beheaded in eastern Syria, we have 4 Arab states that have completely crumbled. Russia's invasion of a European state, ongoing invasion, I should say, tanks are rumbling in as we speak. Chinese threats to our core allies in East Asia. This is not a place where we can just simply kind of hunker down and hope the rest of the world goes away. I mean, maybe if you're New Zealand and you're a nice little country, on a far corner of the world, you can treat the rest of the world as if it's just a distant place. But that's not an option for an American president. And we need a president who understands that being indifferent and reactive, the way this president has been, is just not a recipe for success. That's another reason I wrote this book.
Well, Bret, it's one of those things as well that, if that was your idea that, okay, I'm going to isolate you, treat this as a spectator sport, okay, well, look at all the things that have happened. You would think that most thinking people would say to themselves, okay, well, obviously that policy is proving not to work out very well. The minute we pulled our horns in, everybody went nuts out there. We're going to have to turn outward again.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, this is the basic problem for Republicans. Okay, Republicans will say, look, Obama's foreign policy isn't working, and right now a large majority of Americans are going to agree with that statement. But then the American people are going to turn around and say, well, what's your idea? And the idea can't simply be, let's go and try to save the Iraqi people from themselves. Let's try to heal crippled societies. That's not a recipe for success either. And again, what I make the case for here in this book is that America needs to understand the difference between being a policeman and being a priest, being in the business of enforcing the rules, punishing the wicked, reassuring the good. That's what a cop does. And being in the business of changing hearts and saving souls. That's what we were trying to do for too long in Iraq. So I make the argument for America as the world's policeman, because none of us want to live in a neighborhood where there is no policeman, and I don't think we want Vladimir Putin as the policeman or the Ayatollahs as the policeman. We want America as the policeman, but we have to understand that being a cop is a very different job from being a priest, and that's a distinction I'm trying to make here.
Bret Stephens with us, the new book, America in Retreat. Current events, real current events. What happened in Jerusalem yesterday, this barbaric, brutal attack. What do we have to take away from this? Because it seems like these attacks, it seems like these terrorists are becoming more brutal, more barbaric to garner even more attention.
Right. I mean, I lived in Israel for a number of years as a journalist. I was the editor of the Jerusalem Post, and we had suicide bombings all the time. But there's something about yesterday's attack that was just sort of extraordinary in its cruelty and really in its barbarism. One point to make is you have too much of the Muslim world celebrating these kinds of attacks, and so this is really, in Samuel Huntington's phrase, there is a clash of civilizations at work here, and we can't be blind to that reality. We also have to understand that these terrorists, are not going to be mollified by territorial concessions or by trying to make ourselves, the United States, less conspicuous in the world. These people know only the language of force, and we have to explain it to them in that language.
And you know, and to the topic at hand about being in retreat, part of being in retreat to me is the president's statement of yesterday where this horrible slaughter takes place, and then he chastises both sides about backing off the violence.
Right. I mean, exactly. He denies the victims the benefit, at least the benefit of knowing that they are the victims of this attack. It's a process with this president in which he does more to he scolds our friends and he coddles our enemies, and that has been the consistent theme from the reset with Russia, the outstretched hand with Iran. We might have a nuclear deal with the mullahs that are going to take them a step closer to a bomb in just the next few days. And yet, when it comes to our friends, the Poles, the Israelis, the Taiwanese, this is a standoff kind of guy, and that's a terrible thing because Machiavelli once said that in foreign policy, the best thing to be is a firm friend and a thorough foe, and that's the right approach to foreign policy. We are not a firm friend to our allies. We are not a thorough foe to our enemies, and we're reaping the whirlwind as a result.
Bret Stephens with us, Pulitzer Prize-winning Wall Street Journal columnist. His new book is America in Retreat, the New Isolationism and the Coming Global Disorder. There's this chasm, I think, between people who are ready, willing to use military force, not warmongers by any stretch, but those who realize it's necessary, and those who are just deeply opposed to it, no matter what the circumstances, that we should not be involved. And yet you look around, we have so many different kinds of conflicts and problems, whether it be Syria, right? Perhaps a failed state in Iraq, what's happening between Russia and Ukraine, the rise of ISIS, growing power in China. How do you thread this needle? And you were kind of talking about this earlier. Thread that needle between being a policeman while not overextending yourself and not crawling back within yourself. This is that's why you wrote a book, I'm sure, a very difficult topic.
Right, exactly. And there's no one answer to every single case. But we do know that, the measure of a policeman's success is not how often he draws his gun. It's really the measure is the fact that people see him there, notice that he has a gun, and therefore act reasonably. And one of the problems that we have is we have a military that is shrinking so far, so fast, against the advice of our best generals, an army that's going to the size it was in the 1930s, a navy that's going to the size that it was in World War I, that gun, so to speak, if you'll stick with my metaphor, is looking smaller and smaller and smaller, and so it's not performing its deterrent and reassuring function. There are obviously times when we will need to intervene to prevent outrageous behavior or threats to national security, like the creation of a caliphate in the heart of the Middle East, in Anbar province and Syria. Those are some of the right occasions, but it's also the credibility of American power, and that's what is retreating as well. This is a president who offers red lines and then sinks and then retreats from those, and that sent a dreadful signal. It's not an accident that Vladimir Putin noticed what had happened in Syria and invaded Ukraine. And the Iranians are also confident that they will suffer no consequences from this president for trying to get a nuclear weapon. So on it goes. You have a kind of a broken windows world where if one window is broken and it's not repaired, pretty soon other windows get broken.
Spending some time with Bret Stephens, the book, America in Retreat, The New Isolationism and the Coming Global Disorder. Now, in not confronting our enemies, and you leave our friends flying in the breeze, you make an excellent point. Leaving our friends to go off on their own foreign policy tangents of what might serve them best, and it may not help us.
No, I mean, that's exactly, I mean, look, part of the problem is we're telling the rogue states that it's open season, that they face no real consequences other than maybe a speech from Barack Obama saying, you know, naughty, naughty. But the other problem is that whether you're the Israelis now suddenly doubting the credibility of American assurances that we won't allow Iran to get nuclear weapons, or the Saudis, not friends, but they have been allies, or the Japanese. Look, Japan is a country that could produce nuclear weapons overnight if it wanted to. They haven't because they think American nuclear deterrence has been a good enough security policy, an insurance policy. But do we really want a world in which suddenly the South Koreans, the Japanese, and a dozen more countries suddenly acquire nuclear weapons? Because I grew up in the Cold War, and I remember that deterrence was difficult when it was just the USA versus the Soviet Union. Imagine a world in which you have 20 or 25 nuclear weapon states, including in the Middle East, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Pakistan, maybe Turkey. That's a dangerous world, and we are ambling into that world because we are not giving our friends the assurances that we will be there for them to make sure that their countries are secure and that their interests are being looked after.
Bret Stephens with us here, Wall Street Journal, and the new book, America in Retreat, The New Isolationism and the Coming Global Disorder. I know you got to run here in a minute. If you can, quickly, take us a little bit through Chapter 9 in this book. Chapter 9, imagining the world, just 5 years from now, if we allow current trends to continue. It's not a pretty picture. What do you see?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote this because I wanted to give readers a kind of imaginative glimpse based on current realities of where we might be in the not-too-distant future. 2019 is 5 years around the corner. Imagine if Saudi Arabia essentially gets cold feet about the nuclear deal with Iran and decides to become the first country in the Middle East to test a nuclear weapon. I see that coming around the corner. Imagine if there is a massive economic crisis in China, and by the way, China can't walk on water forever, and the Chinese regime decides that in order to shore up its legitimacy, it's going to start acting much more aggressively militarily in the South China Sea. Imagine if Russia, sensing the West's weakness, decides to break the back of NATO by invading one of the Baltic states. I wrote this, by the way, months ago, long before people were talking about these as plausible scenarios. Now my biggest fear is that my predictions may be coming true a little sooner than I anticipated. But this is the world we are ambling into, and it's happening especially because I think a lot of America's enemies sense that with Barack Obama in the White House, they have 2 years facing a relatively weak and indifferent president who wants nothing more than for the rest of the world to go away.
Book will send a shiver or two up your spine, but you're going to learn an awful lot from Bret Stephens and America in Retreat, The New Isolationism and the Take Two and the Coming Global Disorder. Not easy for me to say, but you're going to want to grab the book anyway. Bret, thanks a lot for your time this morning. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's an honor.